The absolute first step you're going to do for any type of setup on the X2 is verifying you have a good X2. Deflate all the air out of the shock, push it down on the table, and if any squishy noise comes out, you need to stop. You can also do this on the bike. So this means there's air inside of the oil. So this video is for the 2024 model, but they're still cavitating. This is what happens inside of the shock. There's air, bubbles inside of the oil, so the damping will be inconsistent. After verifying your shock is in good working order and not squishing, pull this serial number off the bottom of the shock. You're going to punch it into the Fox ID website and verify you're working with a 2024 model on your bike. So check this out. This is a 2022 and a 2024 in my hand. While they look identical, they ride completely different, hence the new setup video. Now the 2024 model has some additional new parts inside of it, so the difference in these two shocks, I do believe, don't have physical proof of teardown is the valving, the shim stacks are inside of it are a lot different. If your X2 has an unknown history, like you don't know where it came from, you need to tear it apart and see what kind of tokens are inside of it, because tokens can completely destroy the ride on the 24 X2. We're going to deflate all the air slowly, and if your shock does this, stuck down position, it's extremely dangerous. You could actually die. The goal of that segment wasn't to scare you, it's so you can respect it, just like riding gnarly trails. To fix a stuck down condition, you need to reinflate the shock, put it back in your bike, cycle it a few times so they equalize, and then deflate the air very slowly. Regardless of what kind of air shock you own, if you own an air shock, you absolutely have to own this tool. It's an automotive Schrader valve, and if you buy this $14 one linked in the description, it has a torque wrench on it. It's pretty cool. It's the same Schrader valve tool and the same Schrader valve that's inside of your car's tire. Now this Schrader valve will absolutely destroy your setup if the air leaks out slowly, and it will ruin your ride if they completely leak out. To open up the outer air canister on the Fox Float X2, you're going to get a tiny flat bladed screwdriver, put it into the channel, and once it's up, you need to violently tear this out. Don't worry about scratching it and bending it, because that's probably going to happen. Now this next step is a little bit null and void with the 2024 X2 model, because they kind of made tokens obsolete because they put a negative token inside of this shock. But if you go inside of the setup guide, it does state how many tokens you can put in your designated shock size. The tokens come inside of your box and they just clip together and they go inside of this outer air can. Now putting this air can back on gets a little bit tricky. There's 3 keyways, you line it up and it will slide into place. The hard part is getting this clip back on the shock in the right orientation inside of the grooves. This is the trick here. You're going to take a flat bladed screwdriver and you're going to roll it around in a circle, and that will help it go into the 3 channels. It must be in place before you put any air in this shock. So all 3 of those channels need to look like this. If adding tokens in or doing that whole procedure is above your pay grade, don't worry about it. And they also come with 0 tokens if they are brand new. If you were riding a Specialized Levo with the stock shock 210x55 and weighed 80 kilograms or more like myself, I would put 1 token in this to start. The lightweight riders, 100% 0 tokens. If your bike has a maple syrup leaf on it or it's known progressive, you are for sure going to start with 0 tokens. But the safest bet is to start with 0 tokens. The best experience you're going to have with the X2 is on more linear suspension bikes, like Specialized bikes. Now, if your bike does have a flip chip, it's very important for you to try to figure out which setting is the least progressive, because we're dealing with an air shock. So brands don't like to reveal this number. So example here, I emailed Rocky Mountain, built this up out of Photoshop with the official numbers, so I'll be putting my bike into position 4. It's more often than not that brands will tell you whether or not it's a high-low flip chip setting, so you want to put this into the high setting because that's typically least progressive setting. These are based on my experiences. Letting the shock control the end stroke feels much smoother than the bike ramping up itself. Before any shock goes on my bike, I take the rebound and put it to the full fast setting, and I open up the compression. The shock, when you compress it, it should rebound up. Make sure the rebound's in the full fast setting. If it doesn't rebound up, that means the internal floating piston gas charge is low. You need 2 tools to recharge this. the internal floating piston adapter that I linked in the description, and the Schrader Valve tool. Use your standard shock pump, inflate this to 100 psi, and make sure it rebounds up. If you don't like big gouge marks in your plastic fiber bike, these are the steps I like to take when I'm mounting my shock up. I throw a couple Costco rags on the frame, nice microfiber cloths, and then I start by loosening up the shock bolts. Double triple check that Schrader valve is tight inside of the air can, because you do not want this coming loose. So we're going to do the air filling procedure, and that thing's going to be doing some work. You may need a vise to mount up your stupid bearing mounting hardware if you are adding this into your bike. If you are mounting up a new shock into your bike, you want to use the Fox mounting hardware. You want to avoid the RockShox hardware like the plague. So it doesn't like the X2, it actually gouges the frame, and here's an example of me gouging my frame. So Fox hardware to the wind, because you don't need any special tools to put it in. Inside of the Fox setup guide, we have the 2022 on the left and the 2024 on the right. These are kind of the rough clicker recommendations based off of air pressure. Interestingly, there was no update for the 2024 model, and it's a completely different shock. Now before we set sag, you want to make sure that rebound is in the full fast setting and the compression is wide open or in the softest setting. Do you see that tool on the screen right there? That's a very sharp, pointy tool that could damage your stanchion. So I like to transfer over my sag measurements onto a piece of cardboard. You're going to pull your iPhone out and you're going to go, "Hey Siri, what's 30% of 65? It's 20 millimeters. So also add another tick for 35%, because the X2 kind of rides pretty good deep into the sag. In part 1, Fox Float X2 setup guide, I actually deflated a shock and measured the usable stroke amount. So there's a bump stop in there, and the bump stop's like 10 millimeters big. But when you clap the bike out, it only compresses down another 5 millimeters. So just remember, when you're setting sag, it's not rocket science. Just take the rated stroke measurement and divide it by 30. Before installing any X2 on your bike, you are going to fully compress this with no air in there. That's because the air filling valve is very close to my frame. I actually gouged my first e-bike on the air filling valve because I had it orientated incorrectly. So for demonstration purposes only, I pumped this straight up to 300 psi, and this is what will happen if you do that. The pre-2024 model was extremely sensitive to top out conditions, but with the new 2024 model with the negative token installed, it's not as sensitive to this. So here's a hot tip: we're going to deflate the shock, and anytime you deflate the shock and compress the suspension, make sure you disconnect the shock pump, because I actually gouged my frame right here. I was like, what an idiot. Now technically, to the ultra bike nerds, you need to be in your racing riding position to measure the sag. I don't understand why bike people have to make things so complicated. You can just sit on the bike and get it close. Because dynamic sag is when you are riding the bike, that's what you want to really set your air pressure off. If you are a heavyweight rider, getting the shock up to 300 psi is an absolute nightmare. So every 50, 75 psi, you have to depress the shock. Make sure you disconnect the shock pump, because you could ruin your frame. And then pump it back up, jump on it, pump it back up. This is going to take you like 10 minutes. After about 10-minute stroking session, I got up to 298 psi to get 30% sag. So depending how your bike's leverage curve is on the rear suspension will dictate how much air pressure is inside of there. Do not take this shock above 300 psi. Buy a coil shock if you are heavier than me at 220 pounds. After many X2s and many different bikes, I feel like everyone just overcomplicates the clickers. So if you want the perfect setup, you have to tune it for each style of terrain. But if you set your shock up in the chunky stuff for traction, it's a completely different setup from the blue flow trails. The blue flow trail setup is substantially more difficult because you need to build in the proper amount of progression with a little bit slower of a rebound. The flows trail setup works in the chunk, but it is a little bit of a compromise. I just like to have one setting for all kinds of trails. The next couple steps will not work unless you have properly set the sag to 30 or 35%. We're going to focus on the rebound, and all you have to do is count the clicks and then divide it in half and put every rebound in the middle, both high and low speed. But simultaneously, we're going to put the compression into the middle as well. If you do any style of jumping, you want to set your rebound based off your basically biggest jump. So that's maybe a 6-foot jump I just cased. and my rebound feels pretty dialed in the middle setting. So we're not really adjusting anything quite yet. Gotta go pull over and plug your shock pump in, because air shocks like to do funny stuff. Sometimes they'll dump like 40 or 50 psi after the first little compression they get. Fortunately, Fox shocks are not hypersensitive to air pressure like RockShox and other brands on the market, so this air loss is acceptable because when the air shock or the air pump fills up, it loses a little bit of air. If you're the kind of guy who likes to huck your bike to flat on purpose to feel your suspension cycle, you want to set the bottom out control first. The 2024 X2 has a new feel. It's definitely more supportive, so building up the bottom out control is a lot easier. But if your bike was linear, this would be the time to add a token into the mix. But there's many people out there who only ride with their wheels on the ground, and there's nothing wrong with that. Regardless of your style, I would just ride the fastest piece of trail that you're comfortable with and familiar with, and you're going to go very fast and set your clickers off of this. But if you followed the first two steps of the end of this video, of setting your sag and putting your adjusters in the middle, there's a very high chance that you're completely done at this point. I am a heavyweight rider, so lighter riders, if you feel like you're not using all the travel, you just completely turn off the compression and you would also be done. Now that was the very simple setup that I could completely live with, but the advanced course is basically we're going to leave the compression in the middle, we're going to give it 4 clicks on the low speed department. This is the 3mm Allen key, and we're going to turn that whatever way says faster. But simultaneously, also going to move the high speed compression 2 total clicks. So this kind of splits the difference between those 2 rebounds. And we're only going to be setting this off the high speed trails. 2 from fully fast on high speed, 4 clicks faster on low speed. The mission here is to make things simple. So I'm basically going to be setting the rebound off how it feels when I'm going off of a lip when I'm riding very fast, because that's most likely the time you're going to crash, when you are riding fast. So set your rebound off the fastest speed you're comfortable riding, and disregard high and low speed clicker, this and that. We're only adjusting these in one group. This may seem absolutely bonkers to you with the rebound in 12. Now I'm going to try to make this feel bad going down that same section of trail. We're trying to make the rebound feel a little bit bucky. So I moved both clickers into the fully fast setting for the next run. So remember, we're on our most comfortable set of trails, so you should be pretty familiar with that jump. Experimenting with these new setups can be a little bit dangerous, so you need to really take your time and not be pushing your limits. Be on your most familiar trail system. Gauging the rebound off of the lips, it is a little bit too bucky. So word of caution here, you're just as likely to crash from too slow of a rebound as too fast. But this is too bucky, so let me show you how to fix it. It's in the middle at 5. We're going to add 1, 2. After finding the fastest rebound possible, we're going to leave the rebound alone. And then you're going to go to the high speed compression, add 2 clicks, and on the low speed, you're going to add 4 clicks. So this basically splits the difference between those 2. So these only get adjusted together if you don't want to spend all day doing this. Remember, I'm on the same set of trail, so going off the lips, the rebound feels like it's in check. So essentially, we're just using the compression to slow the rebound down. If you don't believe me, go out on the trails and try this. So this setup took me a total of 15 minutes, but also 2 years to develop it. Before adding in high levels of compression, the front of the bike was pretty nose heavy. Adding it in, we have a very level bike that's very in control and jumps excellent. This is the Flow Trail setup. So if I was going to some chunky, rocky, rooty sections, basically I would just back off a little bit of compression to make the bike a little bit more softer. A faster rebound will eat chunk like you've never seen before. If you weigh 200 pounds, 100 kilograms, and you're running a full fast rebound and relying on the compression, you may run into this problem of the bike clapping out. At this point, you're going to back off a couple clicks of high and low speed rebound. So rebound is the master control. Just think about compression's only purpose is serving your rebound. You have to click this link on your screen and become a channel member, because you have to see what happens in part 2 of this video, and especially if you're a heavyweight rider.